Hi everyone, welcome back to FoxLearn. In today's video, I'll show you how to implement API versioning in ASP.NET Core. But first, let's quickly talk about why API versioning is important. As your application grows, you might need to make changes to your API, like adding new features or changing how it works. If clients are still using your old API, you don't want those changes to break their apps. That's where API versioning comes in. It allows you to support multiple versions of your API. So existing clients continue to work, while new clients can use the latest features. Let's get started. First, open Visual Studio and click on Create a new project. Next, select the ASP.NET Core Web API template. Enter a name for your project, then click Next. Now, choose the latest version of .NET and click Create. Once the project is created, right-click the project and choose Manage NuGet Packages. In the search box, type asp.versioning. Let's go ahead and install the following packages. These packages help us add versioning support to our controllers and make it easier to document the versions using tools like Swagger. Now, let's create versioned controllers. Start by going to the Controllers folder, then create a new folder named V1. Inside the V1 folder, add a controller named Hello Controller. In this controller, we'll set the API version to 1.0 using the API version attribute. Then we'll update the root to include the version segment as shown below. Let's add a simple action called get and mark it with map to API version set to 1.0. Now, let's create another version by adding a folder named V2 inside the controllers folder. Then add a Hello controller to the V2 folder. In this controller, we will set the API version to 2.0, then update the root to reflect version 2. You also need to mark the API.explorer settings with a group name for both controllers so that the API documentation is correctly grouped by version. Let's add the same get method, but mark it with map to API version set to 2.0. Now we have two separate versions of the same controller. Next, open the Program.cs file and add the following configuration to register API versioning. Default API version lets us set the default API version to use when the client doesn't specify one. Assume default version when unspecified allows clients to omit the version, and the default will be used automatically. Report API versions adds information about the supported API versions in the response headers. A PI version reader tells the app where to look for the version. Here, we read it from the URL. Group name format controls how version names appear, like V1 or V2. Finally, substitute API version in URL. Make sure the version number is replaced correctly in the URL roots. Now let's test it by running the app and accessing the following routes: /API/v1/hello and /API/v2/hello. You'll see different responses depending on the version. Now let's integrate Swagger to generate API documentation. Open Manage NuGet Packages again, then search for Swagger and install the following packages. Once installed, create a new folder named Options. Inside the folder, create a class called Configure Swagger Options. This class will implement IConfigure options of Swagger Gen Options. Inject IApiVersionDescriptionProvider into the constructor. This gives you access to all available API versions. Next, implement the configure method. In this method, iterate through all API versions and add the OpenAPI information for each version. You can also configure predicates or filters to control which APIs appear in Swagger. A predicate is a condition or rule used to evaluate each API endpoint. It allows you to control what appears in Swagger. For example, you might include only specific API versions, exclude internal or private endpoints, or hide endpoints marked as deprecated. Now, go back to the Program.cs file to register Swagger and configure the version information. First, we'll obtain the API version description provider by calling getRequiredService with IApiVersionDescriptionProvider. Then enable Swagger by calling useSwagger. Finally, configure the Swagger UI by calling useSwaggerUI. Inside the Swagger UI setup, loop through each API version description from the provider. For each version, we will add a Swagger endpoint using its group name. Now run the project and open your browser. Then navigate to https://localhost, your port number, /swagger/index.html. You'll see both API versions clearly listed in the Swagger UI. And that's it. You've now added API versioning and integrated Swagger to document each version in your asp.NET Core Web API. API versioning is a great way to ensure that old apps continue to work while you add new features to your API. Thanks for watching this video. If you found the tutorial helpful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos.